The Latin America FinTech and open banking revolution is here. So we wanted to talk to somebody at the forefront of that. I'm Stephen Sargeant. This is Around the Coin podcast. And we have Ximena Aleman from Prometeo. She's the co-founder and co-CEO. And they're building one of the largest FinTech API infrastructure in the region of Latin America, but also tapping into the US financial market when it comes to things like account verification and all the tardiness and hardness of sending wire transfers. They've plugged everything in. So we talked a lot about the fintech market here in Latin America. We talked about the ecosystem when it comes to tech and startups as they just finished raising $13 million and how they plan to spend that capital. We talked a lot about neo and challenger banks and open banking infrastructure and some of the successes, huge successes that have come out from places like Brazil with their picks. This is a really great information session and podcast for anyone that's in the payment, fintechs, and even those in crypto, because we're seeing Brazil top 10 lists of grassroots adoption of crypto. So definitely Latin America is now leading the forefront when it comes to fintech and crypto. Feel free to reach out to Ximena. She even provided her personal email address if you wanted to get connected and figure out what's happening in LATAM, especially for your business. Enjoy the show. This is your host, Stephen Sargeant, the Around the Coin podcast. We're going to go deep into fintech in Latin America. We have Ximena Aleman from Prometeo. We spent the first half of this pre-recording laughing about how we're trying to pronounce different names. So I probably got that a little bit wrong. So we'll let you introduce yourself and give us all the nice pronunciations of your name and your company name so that people remember it.
I will do the Spanish version of my name. Hi, happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Really excited about the conversation. My name is Ximena Aleman. I am co-founder and co-CEO of Prometeo. And Prometeo is a single cross-border banking API for Latin America.
That's awesome. Now, your start is, I looked a little bit in the background. You have a communications, content marketing, just like myself, but you also have a journalist background, which is awesome. I think a few of our guests here have had similar backgrounds, many of them founders, many of them now working with some of the biggest crypto exchanges in the world. How do you utilize those skills that you think? We always take some of those skills from our past. Was it useful for you to promote Prometeo and get the messaging out there or find the right brand message? How has your past been, those skills transferred to today for you?
Definitely. In the startup world, we have this model of connecting the dots. And definitely when I started building fintech solutions in Latin America 10 years ago, I was doing a difficult transition. Now, 10 years afterwards, it's something that I think it was almost natural and that it really paid it out for Prometeo, So yes, my background is in journalism. I work for the most important media outlets here in Uruguay. I'm based in Uruguay. Uruguay is a small country in the south cone between Argentina and Brazil. It's not Paraguay. It's Uruguay. So it's two different countries in the south cone with very similar names. Then I transitioned to creating a digital content hub. It was my first experience as an entrepreneur. I really loved it. And I started an MBA with focus in tech businesses. This was 2013, 2014. The fintech wave was just beginning in Latin America. In 2015, Venice came up with Nubank. So everything was just at the very, very, very beginning. And I met my co-founders and we started building fintech solutions. The first one was happy to build wallet, then a PSN, Mint in the US. And then we started Prometeo to bridge the infrastructure gap between different regions, different countries in Latin America, and create open banking infrastructure across LATAM. But in 2016, 2017, open banking wasn't even a word, fintech wasn't even a word, or it was just a very niche thing. Open banking was just starting, and so I think that my journalist skills, especially understanding different audiences and also being able to create a compelling story about what was open banking and the opportunity behind open banking was crucial for the startup at the very beginning, because especially when you are initiating, of course that you need go-to-market skills, But I would say that the first go-to-market skill is being able to communicate what is that you are doing and why that's so important, and what's the opportunity, what's the value proposition, especially at the beginning. Sometimes you're starting to discover that, it's not that it's very clear. It's not like you're selling brand, it's okay. I think that this could be useful for this and for that, like I'm trying to understand customers, and I think that the opportunity is this one, but perhaps is this other one, and so like understanding your audience and creating a compelling story for that audience. I think that it's a very, very attractive skill, a very necessary skill. And I think that that was something that the journalism did for me and definitely did for Prometeo.
Can I intervene here? Take us back. You said like open banking, fintech wasn't really going on back in the time, 2014. What was the existing, payment rails like? Like you see now that, a lot of the payment rails are still archaic. We're still struggling. So that's why so many fintech and crypto companies are coming into play. How difficult was it to transfer money from Uruguay to, Paraguay, as you said, or from Colombia to another country, Brazil? How difficult was it? Like, were people really struggling? Was there an issue with remittances if you're working in one country, but your family's living in another? Can you kind of level the playing field for us and give us a little bit of snapshot of what you felt the ecosystem was like at that time?
Definitely. It was, as you said, very legacy, very archaic. Most of it, Swift, Western Union, like the incumbents, the legacy players that have been around since the 19th century, 20th century, sorry. And so I think it was very user experience, very outdated, and especially thinking about digital penetration, internet penetration, smartphone use in Latin America, everything was, in terms of the infrastructure, everything was peaking in Latin America, but financial services access and availability was still a very poor experience in LATAM, very costly, very, very costly, something that I always try to stress, especially when we talk about Latin America, is that, of course, that we are used to thinking about the macros in Latin America, which are really hard, unemployment, poverty, inflation, devaluation, like all of the macros that from an entrepreneur perspective, you cannot solve, it's not your thing. Like that's politicians, that's policymakers. But with all of those problems, there's also like a user experience problem, which is money, of course, is hard to earn, but it's also hard to move, hard to keep, hard to invest. So it's hard to open a savings account. It's hard to get a credit card. It's hard to make digital payments. It was hard, like 10 years ago, it was very, very hard. And so I think that it came to us like LATAM fintech entrepreneurs to change that reality, We couldn't change the macros, but we could change user experience with money, and that's, I think, what has been changing in LATAM over the last 10 years with neobanks, digital wallets, and I think like the infrastructure wave that we are witnessing right now.
I love it. Tell me a little bit about Prometeo, because you're not only servicing Latin America, you're connecting the Latin American financial ecosystem with the US. Now, I know like in the Caribbean, like Miami is their kind of financial hub, which is kind of strange, right? A lot of, transactions, every time people have to do something out here, they're going to Miami. That's kind of like the hub and the bridge for the Caribbean. Was there that bridge that existed? Is, kind of Miami still the bridge for you? Or what were some of the issues that you were seeing? And why is there a need for a connection to Latin America and to the US? Is it business related? Is it like family members, remittances? Really kind of draw that out. What gap were you trying to solve when you and your co-founders started Prometeo?
Yeah, definitely. I think that initially for us, the gap was among Latin American countries, and so basically Prometeo, as I mentioned, is a cross-border banking API. So what we're trying to do is to connect financial companies and global corporations to the banking rails in Latin America through a single API so that they can do bank account verification, bank account aggregation, and payment initiation with a single integration. For that purpose, what we did was we created the largest open banking network in LATAM. We are aggregating more than 1,000 APIs from 1,000 financial institutions in 11 countries of Latin America, okay? And the idea here is to create a single infrastructure across markets. Because when we think about the US, it's a single market. When we think about Europe, It's fragmented, it's different countries, but still, it's a single infrastructure. It's a single market. Latin America can benefit a lot from having this single infrastructure across countries, But the difficulty is that each country works differently, has its own infrastructure, its own rails, its own tech, And
Right.
so plugging into Latin American rails, it's a headache. It's something that you have to replicate country by country by country. So it's like sort of the Spanish, We think about the Spanish in LATAM, it's the same. No, it's not the same, And so you have the Órale and Ahorita from Mexico, and you have the Ya Voy from Chile, and you have the Ta, which is very Uruguayan, and the Chalón, Boludo, the Argentina, And so each country has its own flavor, its own
Right.
particularities. And with the financial infrastructure, it happens exactly the same. It's different in each country. But for global corporations and global financial institutions trying to plug to Latin America, so it's a country by country, headache by headache, all over again. And so that's our job at Prometeo, reaching the infrastructure gap across each country. That's what we are trying to solve. And of course, that once you solve that puzzle, which for us was last year, beginning of this year, we were able to create like this single infrastructure. And now we are providing a bank account verification in 10 countries in Latin America, in Mexico, and in Brazil. We launched our account-to-account payments in Mexico in the first Q of the year. We are launching payment initiation in Brazil in this Q. And so we thought, okay, we are already doing this. But what we are finding out is that most of the use of our infrastructure is cross-border right now. So it's customers, financial institutions in the US that are trying to access the banking rails in Latin America. And so here there is something that provides a lot of value, And of course, Miami, it's a natural hub in which to be because there are natural flows, like money flows, Right. And remittances is one, unavoidable. Like people send the money from the US to LATAM, okay? And we are used to thinking about the money flow, But the thing is that the money flow also creates a data flow, okay? And that data flow, it's very siloed. It's very close into legacy systems. How can we improve experience and data understanding if we are all able to open those silos and provide access to real-time data, an API, to have automated flows, And so we are creating efficiencies over the pre-existing cross-border money flow, okay? And that's the cross-border data flow. And that's something that we are tackling. We launched a few months ago our bank account verification service in the US, okay? And so now we are not only providing access to bank account verification in Latin America, but also in the US, okay? And well, I think that's the first step of Prometeo outside Latin America, a very crucial one.
Just before you go on, for some people that don't understand, like what's bank account verification and why is that important, right? Are you like, maybe walk us through a quick example of like, why is this an issue? Like, are people not knowing if they set up a Brazil bank account? Like, do the US bank not know exactly who that person is? Like, what's the verification? And why do you think this is kind of like your linchpin into making sure that, it builds and bridges these ecosystems?
Okay. So imagine that you're sending money from the US to bank account in Colombia. Okay? Remittances. And you're using SWIFT because you already own a bank account in the US, and who's receiving the remittance in Colombia already has a bank account.
Right.
Just you put in the online banking the bank account number and you send it. And there's no way until the transfer gets rejected that you put a number who was incorrect or that bank account was closed because an issue.
Interesting.
Or that you missed the person who sent you the bank account number, put it incorrectly. Okay. And so that creates huge inefficiencies because getting the money back it doubles the time that it took to get the money there, and it costs twice as much. Okay.
And I think everyone's had that phone call with the bank about a wire
Exactly.
transfer that was wrong.
Exactly.
How many days? Oh no, you have to come into the bank now. What? Like I did it online. Like, yeah, I think that's why I was laughing. I was like, we've all experienced that no matter what country, the pain of
Exactly.
having a wrong wire transfer.
Exactly. And from the perspective of the person who's receiving, like this expectation of will the
Right.
money arrive or it won't, which it doesn't seem at all 21st century, because we're used to what's up. Oh, here it used to go.
Right.
People getting done immediately, and receiving messages immediately. And with the money, we are not there yet. And so providing the verification that the bank account exists, who's the owner of that bank account, providing certainty that bank account number is correct, it provides traceability on that cross-border wire. Okay? And that's what
especially
we
if you're
are.
talking about remittances, the person on the other side in Colombia, they're probably really expecting or needing this money. And then even if you're talking about a business relationship, if you're paying a vendor and you don't know that the funds have been rejected and your vendor now thinks you haven't sent the funds, it creates, as you said, that trust element is huge.
Huge. And if you're thinking from a more SMEs or corporations perspective, like if you're sending thousands of payouts and payments to Latin America, it's a headache then, because of course some of them will fail. So of course some of them will be rejected. Of course that there's information that it's updated. Until now, you didn't have a way to verify that. Now we are providing you that efficiency.
Now we have big banks in Latin America. We have HSBC, Scotiabank, Bank of Nova Scotia. Why aren't they the ones that are connecting the dots? Are you kind of leveraging, the institutions that they have to kind of help them API into all the financial? I think I want to ask first, what were the challenges? I'm assuming if you come to Canada and try this, it's very difficult. We have 5 to 6 main banks. They do not like open banking concepts because they have what we would call a monopoly here. How is it you now going into several different countries? Everyone has their own flavor. Everyone probably has their own, process and politics. How difficult was it to you to get all of these banks in Latin America on board?
Well, it's difficult. Of course that it's difficult. Something that is happening in Latin America is that open banking is evolving. Of course that it's immature in some countries. Others like Brazil have leapfrogged the rest of the region. And so the reality in each country is different. What we do is we adapt to that reality, And so we support different types of connectivity in each country. And sometimes even different types of connectivity within one country. What we've been able to do right now, and thanks to the evolution of open banking, and also because we are positioned as leaders in Latin America, is we are creating bilateral agreements with financial institutions, connecting directly with ACH, with the legacy rails in order to provide this verification, But of course that it takes time, like we've been operating in Latin America for almost 6 years now. And we have been providing bank account verification in Latin America since 20. And so, of course, that it takes time to move the wheel, and get on board the most important stakeholders in each country.
Are there any countries that are like, hey, this sounds great, but no, this is not for us. We don't want you. API and ACHA, we're good the way we have it. We don't want access to the US or any other, frameworks. We have our traditional banks here. Is there any countries that you think that, although they may like the technology, this is not for them?
I wouldn't say that it's a country thing, but perhaps more of a financial institution to financial institution discussion,
Right.
So in some cases, you have very upfront, very vanguardly financial institutions that are willing to try trying this type of technology, implement this kind of solution. They understand the value for their customers. And then you have others which will be more reluctant, more conservative, perhaps more local, that don't have cross-border flows. Internally, they don't need this kind of verification, less tech-driven, But I would say that it depends on the strategy and value proposition of each financial institution.
Now, what's interesting is that, have you thought, and of your organization, you've kind of done a great job within Latin America. You've opened up these pathways to the US. Is there any other countries you're like, hey, this would be easily implemented due to either remittances or because Latin America is like on the top of everyone's tongue when it comes to innovation, when it comes to workforce, when it comes to cryptocurrency. Latin America keeps on coming up in every conversation, along with places like Africa. Is there any other countries or jurisdictions where you're like, I can see there being a nice nexus similar to what we have with the US?
Yeah. Well, I would say that there is something that is happening across geographies with bank account verification, which is becoming like a sort of a boom in the tech infrastructure. This was something that didn't exist. And none of the sudden is becoming mandatory in the US, it's becoming mandatory in Europe, like a verification of payee, because the legacy rails are understanding the value of a feature like this. So I think that after the US, for us, the natural step will be Europe, and so being able to aggregate geographies, not just LATAM, not just the US, but also other geographies that could provide value for our customers. Yeah.
Are you just B2B, or you also, have product offerings or service offerings directly for the customer? Are you just kind of plugging in the financial entities in these ecosystems?
Yeah, no, we're a full B2B SaaS platform company, and so we provide our infrastructure, the tech that we've created to financial players and corporations across the globe. Our solution is very tech driven, both in the data side and the payment initiation side of the infrastructure. We are tech players, so we do not process payments, we initiate payments, and the same happens with data. Yeah, we are a tech player.
I love it. What's interesting, you've already mentioned the speed. You've already mentioned things like trust and, reliability is what you're affording people. How about the expenses? We've seen so many different, whether it's even fintech solutions come into regions like this, and people are still complaining that although they're maybe cheaper interest or cheaper fees than the incumbents, they're still high. Do you think this, your solution, or maybe you could talk about, the underbanked population in Latin America, and if you think overall as neo and challenger banks, is that the solution to the underbanked population?
Well, the underbanked population in Latin America, it's a hard issue. Latin America has 650 million of people, okay? And I think that we still have 250 underbanked, 250 million of people that are still underbanked. I was last week in Barranquilla in a FinTech and LATAM event hosted there in Colombia, and David Vélez was there. And so he was, of course, the main keynote speaker. And he mentioned, we're still in the minute one of the FinTech revolution in Latin America. Right. Things are just really starting to happen. But the thing is that in this minute one, we were able to increase the banked population in an almost between 30 and 40%, okay,
Wow.
in the last 5 years of LATAM, back in perhaps a little bit more, around 2015, 2016, the bank population was around 30, 35% across Latin America. And now we are in a 60%, okay? So a lot has been done in Latin America in terms of financial inclusion, reaching the base of the pyramid with financial services, something that was crucial for the development of the region, and that was the big opportunity everyone was talking about in Latin America. This is still a huge opportunity, which is the 30% remaining, and that's like 34 billion market opportunity. So it's huge. We have a great task ahead. I think that part of what's happening right now in Latin America, which is less consumer-centered, but more infrastructure, enterprise-centered, is because we understand that the next wave will be about B2B. And because this B2B, which is SMEs mostly, it is very bank dependent, okay? There's a lot that has to be done in the legacy rails, and we've been able to witness what happened in Brazil with Pix, which has been huge, an enormous revolution in playing, becoming a benchmark into consumer adoption, right now, Pix represents, in terms of transaction, more than credit and debit card combined,
Wow.
when we talk about digital payments in Brazil. That's huge, and it was 4 years. And so I think that we understand from firsthand how necessary that infrastructure is, and that we need to put that infrastructure in place, not just in Brazil, but also in the rest of the countries. And that's Mexico, that's Colombia, that's Chile, that's Peru, that's Uruguay, that's Ecuador. And a lot is being discussed regarding this, and so we have an infrastructure revolution in Colombia at this moment, in Chile at this moment, in Argentina at this moment, both implementing real-time payment rails, implementing open banking in new infrastructure systems. Like Peru will be implement the UPI system in 2 years' time. Colombia, Chile, and Argentina, they are discussing open banking. And so it's a very effervescent, adrenaline time in Latin America. And I think that this is happening because we understand the need of a new foundation, in terms of financial infrastructure, if we want to reach that other 30% of the population, if we want to capture those $34 billion in market opportunity.
I love it. And that actually just answered my next question because, we created a training program with a FinTech consultant, and they highlighted Brazil as being one of the leaders in open banking. And this is through the pandemic, and they kept their word and they executed. And I was going to ask you, do you feel that Latin America has an advantage because of maybe government support across, other nations who seem a little bit slow to the open banking, initiatives? Canada has been fighting tooth and nail. It doesn't feel like we're any further ahead than, maybe where Brazil was back in 2019. Can you talk to me about maybe the regulatory landscape, the government support that maybe gives Latin America an advantage than maybe other larger nations with more capital and resources?
Yeah, I think that's something that happened in Brazil, which for me was the key, and the key insight about what they did. And that has been different to Europe, or open banking adoption in Europe, and what we are seeing in the US and in other countries of Latin America. Mexico, for instance, which was the first one to regulate open banking, is that they understood the need of a digital payment method that could cover and work for the entire population of Brazil. And that was PIX, and that peer-to-peer digital payment transfer method that then became a payment method had a huge adoption, very explosive adoption across the country, And I think that opened our eyes, especially at Prometeo, at understanding that the LATAM reality was very different to the European reality, And we were trying to implement open banking in countries that had a different type of need, a more basic kind of need, which was not the understanding of the data, but actually the money flow, And so being able to understand and conceive like the money flow as a money flow, but also as a data flow, for us was something very interesting and very prolific. But at the same time, understanding that the money flow, that we needed to solve the money flow before jumping to the data flow, because the data flow was the second step. And what was like the bottleneck was in the money flow. And so payment initiation became a thing for Prometeo, and that's why in 2021, we launched our account-to-account payment service, first in Uruguay and Peru and Ecuador. And now we have launched it in Mexico, and Brazil comes next, trying to solve like the payment flow, especially when it comes to companies and SMEs, that used to have just the credit card rails in order to receive digital payments.
Now, have you seen, it's funny, I was getting my coffee this morning, I saw somebody pay with cash, and I'm like, I haven't seen somebody use cash in such a long, it stands out now more than, somebody using their Apple Watch to make payment. What do you see across Latin America? You're going to several conferences. I know Latin America, traditionally, I think cash was used quite regularly, similar to places in Africa. Do you see this involvement? And obviously the pandemic may have something to play with it, but have you seen, since building up Prometeo, this kind of, are we only getting more digital? Do you see more digital payments, digital infrastructure, or are you still seeing very hash-heavy jurisdictions within or regions within Latin America?
No. Latin America is still very cash dependent. It's a very cash-based economy. That's the reality. And I think that sometimes we as experts in the fintech industry, have this bias of thinking like everyone is using money the same way that we are using money. Yeah. But I get to travel a lot across LATAM, and when you visit Peru, when you visit Barranquilla, Medellin, and you are able to go to buy crafts, buy like a local food, not the fancy restaurant where you can pay with Visa, but like the people in the streets, selling fruits or selling vegetables. You can witness why LATAM is still very cash dependent, and 70% of the economy is cash based in LATAM. Okay. And that's huge, and that's a bottleneck for development, and that's a bottleneck for creation. And that's a bottleneck for growth in Latin America. And I think like every fintech expert in Latin America will probably tell you the same, that we are fighting against cash. That's the reality that we want to change, because we understand that having a more digital economy will create development in Latam.
I think people could probably listen to you pronounce different regions in the whole episode. The way you pronounce the names are absolutely amazing. But you also had an impressive raise recently, 13 million, with backing from PayPal, which is interesting because they're also in the payment space. How difficult was it to raise funds and investors? And do they see Latin America as like endless potential? Like what is the interest from investors? And do you feel like I was speaking to somebody from South Africa in a conversation, and when they were raising, some of the investors felt like, hey, they should get the African discount because, hey, you're in that region, you're not in Silicon Valley. What are your thoughts? What was your experience like and your team's experience raising funds in what hasn't been the greatest market in the last 2 to 3 years?
No, definitely, it wasn't the greatest market. I know that like last year was, I would say, like sort of a bloodbath in the fintech space, in the startup space, in terms of fundraising, and how the market was. A very hard market. I think that on our favor, we had great metrics. Okay. We've been always very consistent in how we deploy resources, and also in our growth, in our growth track. We're providing our infrastructure in LATAM to 2 of the 5 largest banks in the world. Most of our revenue came from the US. And I think that despite the market being that bad, the LATAM opportunity is still there, like the market is still there. And yeah, I would say that the business opportunity was still there. At least that was what I was pitching, And of course that you have the LATAM discount. Valuations in Latin America are not valuations in the US. And so I think that's part of the reality, But I think that because of the consistency and because of the quality in our execution and the quality of the team, we were able to close the round, which was, I would say, like perhaps the largest round in the last Q of last year. And happy to onboard terrific partners of PayPal Ventures, Antler, who led the round, Samsung Next, GN Capital, Cometa, of course, that led also our seed round. And yeah, I think that I think I'm always bullish about execution. I think that's the best way to show what is that you are doing and why an investor needs to invest in you. And I think that because we have been operating for a couple of years now, we are able to show our track record. We are able to show as well our efficiency, how we deploy resources, and that builds trust.
How are you spending that money? Like when you get a injection of capital of 13 million, do you where do you obviously are a very big technology stack? Is that where you focus a lot of your attention? Do you start thinking of expansion and growth with biz dev people, and partnerships would probably be a huge portion of your business? 13 million seems like a lot, but when you're building what I think Prometeo is building, I think it runs out pretty quickly. Where do you focus your efforts when you get a cash injection or a capital injection like that?
Yeah, definitely. It seems like a lot when you raise it, and then when you go back to the business plan, and and do that top down, in terms of numbers and how to deploy resources. Yeah, the rent is different, and you realize that, of course, that this is very budget intensive type of solution. I need to deploy a lot of resources before onboarding customers into that tech. And so, yeah, Definitely for us, tech is a priority, has always been. It's where we deploy more of our budget. But in particular, for after this day, we have been trying to deploy more resources into the sales side of the operation. We had always run a very lean operation in terms of salespeople. Like I led the sales team. We were 4 people, five, a pre-sales engineer, an account manager, 2 people in the marketing team, And so it was high time, I would say, to robust that part of the team, to scale the sales machine, which I think it has been a priority for us during this year, and expand that sales machine into new regions, the US, more sales team in Mexico and in Brazil. And so I think that perhaps this is the year in which, in terms of the ratio, we have spent more in sales, but of course that it makes sense because now we have already rolled out a lot of product, and despite having to create more and more connections and roll out more product, yeah, I think it's high time to expand our sales machine.
Yeah, and you have the fundamental infrastructure. So there's actually a product that
Exactly.
people can use versus like, hey, you don't need a tech stack to involve the product, but not necessarily to build the product as much.
Exactly.
I'm assuming there's a lot that goes into make sure it's running smoothly as well. Talk to me. You're from Uruguay. You pronounce it a lot better than I do. I don't think most people don't know about Uruguay until football season comes around. And now everyone knows about Uruguay. And I don't think there's any confusion when it comes to football about who Uruguay is versus Paraguay. I think Uruguay has stolen a lot of people's hearts and probably messed up a lot of their bets when they were betting on soccer. But tell me about it now. You raised a ton of money in Uruguay. Maybe, in the last couple of years, probably the most amount of money, I think. You don't often look at Uruguay as like a startup. You hear a lot about Brazil and Argentina and Mexico. Tell us a little bit about, Uruguay. Like, give us the run of the mill, the Uruguay, the tech scene, the entrepreneurial scene, because I don't think a lot of people talk about it, nor do we have a lot of entrepreneurs that we have to talk to in that region.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it's often a destination that is perhaps overlooked. But once you double tick on the country, you realize the quality of Uruguay, and not just soccer players or football players, not just the quality of its meat, but also the quality of its tech stack. And so, as I mentioned, Uruguay is a small country between Argentina and Brazil, 2.5 million of people living in Uruguay, not a lot of population, and I think that probably provides a lot of life quality to the people in the country. It's a very organized, stable country. The economy, from an economics and political perspective, very stable, has been so for the last 50 years. I would say that highly educated population, which is, I would say, one of the most important assets of Uruguay, and definitely perhaps less popular, but as important tech hub as perhaps Buenos Aires or Chile. Okay. I think that Uruguay has been perhaps more well known in the last years because of its fintech landscape. The token, of course, is Uruguayan unicorn, okay, providing cross-border payments across the globe. It made the first Uruguayan IPO a couple of years ago, but definitely not the only startup, not the only Uruguayan fintech company, okay? And so I would say that most of the fintech that Uruguay produces is a B2B fintech, okay? Created since they were thinking about global expansion, because the market is so narrow here. When you start building something, you start building it from scratch, thinking about what will happen once you expand outside Uruguay, okay? Uruguay is a very, very small market. And so most of what's being done is being done thinking about exporting software. And as a software exporter, it's amazing what Uruguay provides. It definitely have very high quality. Genexus, which is a tech tool, was created in Uruguay. We have had 4 core banking systems created in Uruguay. Topaz, Manentia, which was bought for Technisys, which Technisys bought, and Technisys, which was Argentinian and Uruguayan, was bought by SoFi in the US. We have Periosa, who was bought by Delivery Hero in Germany. We have national cores as core banking that, of course, they sell outside Uruguay, Bandotai, and Infocorp, and Bankingly. Okay, and so I think that that's a lot in the B2B fintech space. I think that this happens because UI has been able to attract and retain talent, tech talent.
Right.
We have a very, very good public education. For the last, I think, almost 20 years, we have had public policies to create the entrepreneurial hub and a startup sector from Uruguay with grants from the government and many incentives for entrepreneurs. I think that we as Prometeo, we're definitely a result of that policy making regarding the tech scene and the entrepreneurial ecosystem. We have received grants from different institutions, and especially at the very beginning when we didn't have like the FSF, Friends, Schools and Family wasn't enough for us. And so those grants were key in order to kick off Prometeo. And I think that, they were definitely, substantial for us. So I think that there's a lot happening. I would say that the last part of this entrepreneurial revolution happening in Uruguay is the wave of outsiders that we have received in the last 2 years, 3 years, especially from Argentina. And so David Vélez is in Uruguay, but also Marco Galperin from Mercado Libre, the founders of Globant, the founder of Ethermax, and so I'm talking about the largest tech companies in Argentina and Brazil. Perhaps the founders are living in Uruguay, and that creates like a networking, a rumor in Uruguay that I think it's very beneficial for the ecosystem.
Oh man, I love it. Thank you so much for going through that. It really draws a picture of, these countries that, as you say, people overlook them, but they're building, they're exporting, and, sometimes we don't look under the hood exactly what country this tech stack comes from. But it's great to hear about, what's being built and now what countries attracting some of that top talent. I think that's really the name of the game, right? Attracting and maintaining top talent is extremely hard, especially when the market is hot. And, everyone, the bigger companies, the more, VC-backed companies are, sucking them all up like a vacuum. Talk to me about, obviously, I'm a compliance by nature professional. Talk to me about what, your API, I'm assuming for most of this. Is there any regulatory requirements by you, or how do you make sure? I'm sure the first question the banks are saying is like, how do we know this is secure? Even if you're not touching the fund, you're the ones processing, you're the gateway. Like, what are your conversations around regulatory and consumer protection, or at least customer fund protection?
That's definitely. And I would say that that's part of the key value proposition that we provide at Prometeo. At Prometeo, we're 3 co-founders. One of them, Rodrigo, who is co-founder and co-CEO with me. His experience comes from the cybersecurity sector. He used to work in AT&T providing cybersecurity advice to financial institutions. He used to, and then he opened his consultancy firm with focus in PCI, DSS, and ISO certifications. And so I think that lucky for us, he brought this excellent expertise into cybersecurity for financial institutions and PCI DSS compliance. And so he adapted that to open banking, And despite not being a regulatory framework in 2018, when we started regarding open banking, we were customizing like those regulatory frameworks from other verticals, and also adapting best practices from other, like the payment infrastructure to open banking, And I think that was crucial to reassure our customers, especially financial institutions, that we were implementing the cybersecurity standards and regulations and compliance that they needed in order to work with us, And I think that was at the beginning very key to providing that reassurance. Of course, that also at the beginning, we were checking a lot what was happening in terms of compliance, data protection, risk management in Europe, Okay, what is that they are doing? And let's try to adapt that to our infrastructure, despite not being mandatory, because it's not about if that's mandated or not. It's because that needs to be part of the business solution, because
that's a competitive advantage nowadays. Compliance, customer protection is a competitive advantage. It's no longer a cost center that we used to think about now, because we see the biggest companies, especially even in FinTech, even some of the banks in the US, when they go belly up, it usually has to do with, not barely meeting the requirements, but not focusing on those requirements as well.
Definitely. That's part of what of the value that you are creating, like that a compliance layer, that risk management layer, it's part of the value of the solution, especially when it comes to open banking,
Yeah.
And so I think that now, of course, when regulations apply, we adapt to the regulations as well, And so we have like what I will say is our regional framework, the things that we do in each country despite the local regulations. And then if we need to add on or customize to a local regulatory requirement, we do that as well. But we are happy to say that the risk data and compliance layer that we've created has been able or has enabled us to onboard the largest financial institutions in Latin America and outside Latin America. We provide infrastructure to see the JP Morgan, Santander, PayU. We work with Banxico in Mexico, with Prometeo in Chile. And so I think that, in terms of partners and customers, we are working with the most important financial institutions in Latin America and outside.
That's amazing. Talk to me about the API. I don't think we've had a lot of, API seems like, oh, you just kind of plug it in. It seems like an easy business model, a lot easier than building like your own blockchain. But I know there must be challenges with API as well. Maybe you can walk us through, are there these challenges? Is it as easy as everyone thinks it is? Or is it just really hard to build the infrastructure? And then once you have the infrastructure, it becomes a lot easier to kind of, scale that infrastructure.
Well, I would say that it's easy to integrate our API. what, what happens beneath that API, that's the hard part, And I think that the hard part is not creating those endpoints for our customers to integrate, something that takes, I would say, between 10 days and 2 weeks. The thing is, what is that we do locally with each financial institution in each country or of Latin America and outside in order to standardize the information, and provide this standardization layer across geographies, across financial institutions, And so I think that creating the local connectivity plus the layer of standardization, I think that that's where the complexity lies,
I'm really interested. You've talked a lot about data. Data is really, a profitable business. You see hedge funds pay millions of dollars to get, a competitive edge over anything when they're making decisions. Because now you're seeing all of these flows, and maybe legally you might not be able to, but have you thought about, hey, I see a trend that this country is always sending to this, jurisdiction, even though that's not our business model, this data and information and trends, especially with so many eyes on Latin America from an investment point of view, have you ever thought about, sectioning off your data and your trends to provide to other companies so that they can now leverage their products and services based on some of the trends that you're seeing?
No, that's not part of our business model. Our business model is creating like the bridge between information, being able to create that infrastructure. And then, of course, how that data is processed, how that data is structured, analyzed, and that's on the customer side, And so being that for great loans, being that for whatever it is, that's something that the customer has to do, that's the product over the infrastructure. Right. At this point of Prometeo's rollout, that's not something that we provide, because for us, it's been always about creating the infrastructure, creating the roles so that you can access that information very easily, very seemingly. And then what happens with that information, that's on the customer side, that's the product that has to be created, designed over the infrastructure that we provide.
I love that. How do you stay focused? I'm sure that, once you create the infrastructure, everyone has ideas on how they can either tap into what you're doing or like, hey, you should do this with AI. How do you stay focused? I'm sure you have a lot of intelligent people when concepts like AI or the metaverse or crypto come up. How do you make sure that you stay on like, hey, we're just the road. Everyone can build what they want on top of the road or on the side of the road. We're just focusing on the road right now.
Yeah. I think that for me, it's hard. With Prometeo happens like the same with what will happen with my personal life. Like I think in the same way, which is like like that phrase, and correct me if I'm saying it wrong, which is like the neighbor grass is always greener, or the grass is greener on the other in the neighbor side, or in the other fence. I don't know, like something like that.
You got it. You got it.
It's something like that, And I think it's the same with startups, like someone always is doing something way cooler, way bigger, way more trendier, Someone is always pitching better, having a better fundraise, I feel like, yeah, if you start comparing, that will happen, But that's not where your attention has to be placed. It's not on what's the other person doing, but actually what is that you are doing. And I've been very bullish about the open banking opportunity in Latin America and outside the world since day one. Since 2016, and I think that at this point, what I think it's very, very exciting for me is that many of the things that I thought would happen or I pitched will happen have definitely happened. Like I'm witnessing that revolution now. And of course, I'm witnessing a lot of other revolutions, but this is mine. Exactly. This was the revolution that I had.
This is your spaceship, right?
Exactly,
This is your spaceship.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I'm naturally focused on in this. I'm knocking other things, despite other things that might be very, very cool, was artificial intelligence. But I know what is happening in the fintech space right now. I know what has happened with infrastructure. I love what open banking is doing for the region, and I'm thrilled to to be able to create more and more, and discover new opportunities that 2 years ago weren't considered. And so I think that keeps me very, very excited about what Prometeo is doing.
I talked to CEOs of exchanges, some of the biggest companies in the world, and I think what you have is a reason why you're so successful. And I hope some of the listeners are in tech, payments, and crypto also see that is your focus on helping people. Like you want to build out the infrastructure that you thought about years ago that would help the most amount of people. And, nothing is straight away, but like sometimes you talk to entrepreneurs like, we're going to do this and then we're going to do that, but they haven't even done this yet. And I think that's what you're focused on. Like, let's do this. Let's make this as the best as it possibly can be. And then everyone else can reconceive ideas of what is meant to be. And it probably looks great when you're going back to some of these banks and said, see, 2 years ago, we told you we're going to do this. This is what we've done. You want to get on board now. It probably makes some of those conversations a lot easier when, you look like Nostradamus, predicting a lot of the things. I want to talk to you because you've been rewarded probably not more than once as a top 100 woman in fintech. And I looked through your LinkedIn, there's been top 50, top 100, top 25. So you're obviously a woman to watch. Talk to me about the diversity in Latin America. We've seen as we get into tech and crypto, people are still thinking of just gatekeepers. The 55-year-old white man is is stopping us or making it difficult. What is it like in Latin America? I feel like there's a lot more diversity in Latin America when it comes to fintech, startup communities, payments. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say that perhaps if we think about diversity in the startup community, yes, you can see a lot of diversity. But I would say that still is very elitistic, the fintech space, and especially when you think about founders creating big fintech startups, usually they will come from the elite in each country, very well educated, like high level families, usually educated in the US, And so I think that there's still a lot of room to improvement in terms of diversity in Latin America. Of course, I think that perhaps we have naturally more diversity. Like, I think that the discussion is diversity compared with what, of course, like in LATAM, everyone is from LATAM, which in the US, that would be diversity,
Right.
But yeah, I think that there's room for improvement, definitely. I think that there are lots of women working in the fintech space and founding fintech companies in Latin America. And I think that the ratio is like 30% of the founders in LATAM are female. Okay. And so I think that that's amazing. Still, the amount of funding going to female startups is very disproportionate. with the funding that the rest of the tech scene receives. I don't know if you're aware of the statistics, but it's like 1% of the funding goes for women, like 1% out of 99.
I'm not aware, and that's
Yeah.
a crazy number compared to how, as you said, the 30% that are actually working in the space. Now you had to get, you're working with some of the biggest banks. Did you find the challenges there, like approaching these banks, because a lot of the traditional banks are still ruled, but as you said, by the elite few. Was it challenging, or did they understand the concepts and they were a little bit more tech driven versus like posture and ego and status driven?
No, I think that, part of the thing with like B2B enterprise sales is that it's very relationship driven, you know?
Right.
And so I think that with fundraising happens the same. It's very relationship driven. And so you have to create relationships. I think that, at least on my experience, you are not, I also, but for myself, I was able to create relationships with everyone, and I think that it happens to other people, but of course, that the relationships that you create are this that I create value for me. And when it comes to Prometeo, they create value for Prometeo. And so I usually know what's the kind of in the type of investor that I'm approaching, what is the type of investor that might be inclined towards investing in Prometeo. I can understand what's the type of customer, like the other person across the table, talking from the bank, and which are his or her aspirations, what's the other person thinking about me, myself, the solution. And I think that I can work with that.
I love it. What's the future, do you feel, of open banking, neo challenger banks in Latin America? And is there anything stopping that future from coming to a reality sooner, do you think?
I think that, as I mentioned before, we are going through a very pivotal time in Latin America. Definitely, in 5 years' time, we will be having a very different conversation, and I think that we will be able, hopefully, we will be able to discuss similar results as the one we had with Brazil, with other countries in Latin America. Hopefully, and this is almost a prayer, we will be able to see a change in the landscape in Mexico, a similar reality to the one that we are seeing in Brazil. Definitely more inflation, more financial services for SMEs in Latin America. And yeah, I think that with this new infrastructure reality and more financial inclusion, we will be having a conversation on financial services and complexity in financial services. The LATAM user is still very immature in terms of complexity. Like we have a savings account and a credit card, and that's it. And so I think that we are starting to get ready to the next step. Okay, what will that be? What is that financial users need in Latin America? So being able to customize financial services to LATAM reality, I think that's a dream for me. Like what can we create, customize to LATAM reality with this new infrastructure in place, yeah, hopefully in 5 years' time, we will be able to have that discussion.
And what have you seen? Because it seems like Latin America has really built out a gig economy similar to the Philippines, right? With like whether it's video editors or virtual assistants, we're starting to see that transition. A lot of the companies that are offering overseas help in the places like the Philippines and Vietnam, we're also see them standing up, kind of a Latin American division. What are your thoughts on that? Do you notice that there's more of a gig economy, especially when you're looking for talent? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that the gig economy was perhaps more of a thing 2 years ago, and then like a lot of promise because of Rappi, and similar companies. And I think that somehow like last year took a lot of the glow regarding that, and put it more perhaps down to earth. I don't know. I think that we'll still have to see, Yeah. I don't think that picture is that clear yet.
Awesome. What are you looking forward to? Prometeo, is there any features that you're excited about? I know you might not be able to give us details, but is there any other countries that you're excited about that maybe you see onboarding more and more financial institutions? What are you excited about at Prometeo, or even just you personally?
Yeah. Definitely. I think that this has been a very exciting year for us with a lot of rollouts in terms of product in key markets. The first step of Prometeo outside Latin America, launching bank account verification or verification of PE in the US, launching our account-to-account payment service in Mexico. We're about to launch it in Brazil. And so I think that that's a lot of growth. I'm very bullish about what will happen next year, like with new expansion in new geographies, launching more product outside Latin America, and delivering of this promise of bridging the infrastructure gap across the Americas, connecting the America with different financial infrastructure services. I think that that's very, very exciting, and it's something that I look forward to definitely. I think that the dream for us was always creating this infrastructure in LATAM, and it was amazing for us to look back and see, okay, we have done that. So now that we have already done that, and we want now to be this cross-border banking API outside LATAM, I think it's time for us to position as leaders, not in LATAM, but as leaders in the infrastructure space in the world, globally, to
It's time
become
to take over the world.
exactly of fintech infrastructure. And then it's something that I really look forward to, like thinking other people thinking about Prometeo in terms of tech excellence, from LATAM to the world. Well, that's a dream come true.
I love it. Ximena, thank you so much. Where can people talk to you, find you? Is LinkedIn the best place? Maybe Twitter, email? I don't know. What's the best place to reach you as people get excited about what you're doing?
Definitely LinkedIn. Yeah, LinkedIn or my email, xaleman.prometeoapi.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, educating on everything Uruguay and Latin America, and really setting the stage for those that, maybe following in your footsteps about building a little bit more in the open banking space. We really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome.